Hi everyone. Today we're going to step into the smoky shadows of 1940s Berlin, where the air is thick with tension and the faint whiff of forbidden tobacco. Picture this, a dimly lit alley, cobblestones slick with rain, where a man in a worn coat huddles, a cigarette glowing faintly between his fingers. The Nazis have banned men from smoking, but here, defiance burns brighter than the ember. You probably won't survive this reality check. Under Hitler's iron grip, a single puff could land you in a labor camp, or worse. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. Drop a comment with your location and local time. I'd love to know where you're watching from. Let's dive into the story. The decree came down in 1941, sharp as a guillotine. German men were forbidden to smoke. Hitler, obsessed with purity and control, declared tobacco a vice that weakened the Aryan race. Women could light up, propaganda painted it as glamorous, but men, the supposed pillars of the Reich, were to abstain. In Berlin, where the war's shadow loomed over every street, the ban was another leash on a city already choking under Nazi rule. Posters plastered on walls screamed warnings, "Smoking is betrayal." Checkpoints sprouted like weeds, SS officers sniffing coat pockets for the telltale scent of tobacco. But in the cracks of this oppression, rebellion smoldered. Karl Weber, a wiry machinist with calloused hands and a permanent scowl, wasn't one to bow easily. At 32, he'd seen enough of the regime's promises curdle into lies. The factory where he worked, a cavernous beast of clanging metal and hissing steam, was his prison by day. By night, he and a handful of co-workers, Fritz, a barrel-chested welder, Hans, a nervous apprentice barely out of his teens, and Otto, the gray-haired foreman who'd fought in the last war, found solace in a hidden ritual. Behind a rusted boiler in the factory's basement, they smoked. The spot was a gamble. The boiler room, tucked beneath the main floor, was a maze of pipes and shadows, but footsteps from above echoed like drum beats. Karl had scouted it months ago after an SS raid caught a man smoking in an alley and left him bloodied. The group's routine was precise. One man kept watch by the stairwell, ear pressed to the door, while the others lit up. They used hand-rolled cigarettes, scraps of tobacco scavenged from black market deals or pilfered from women's purses, wives and sisters who played along, smirking at the irony. Each drag was a quiet act of war. Tonight, the air was damp, the boiler hissing like an angry cat. Karl leaned against a pipe, his cigarette cupped in his palm to hide the glow. Fritz, standing guard, muttered about the latest raid. 2 men caught with tobacco in Kreuzberg, dragged off to who knows where. "They're tightening the noose," Fritz said, his voice low. "Heard they're training dogs to sniff it out now." Hans, pale and twitchy, fumbled his cigarette. "Dogs? Christ, Karl. Maybe we should stop." Karl exhaled, the smoke curling like a ghost. "Stop? And let them own us completely? Number we smoke because we can." His voice was steady, but his eyes flicked to the stairwell. The risk wasn't just arrest. Rumors swirled of camps where traitors were worked to death. Still, the act felt like reclaiming something stolen, a piece of freedom the Nazis couldn't touch. Otto, silent until now, pulled a drag and coughed, his lungs rattling. "Back in 18, we smoked through the trenches," he said. "Mud, blood, and tobacco. That's what kept us sane. This ban, it's not about health. It's about breaking us." The group nodded, their faces carved by the dim light. They weren't heroes, just men tired of being crushed. The cigarettes, rough and bitter, were their middle finger to the Reich. But the stakes were climbing. Last week, a neighbor had vanished after an SS officer caught him with a pack. Karl's wife, Greta, had begged him to quit, her voice trembling as she clutched their daughter's hand. He'd promised to be careful, but careful wasn't enough in a city where eyes were everywhere. As the night wore on, the men traded stories to keep their nerves steady. Fritz spoke of a barmaid who slipped him tobacco under the counter. Hans whispered about a cousin who'd joined the underground, smuggling more than just cigarettes. The boiler room became their sanctuary, a place where the Reich's rules didn't reach. But the illusion was fragile. A creak from the stairwell froze them mid-sentence. Fritz signaled, and they snuffed their cigarettes, grinding the embers into the dirt floor. Silence smothered the room as footsteps passed above, slow, deliberate, then fading. Carl's heart pounded, but he forced a grin. "Close one," he whispered. The others chuckled, the sound brittle. They relit their cigarettes, the tiny flames defiant in the dark. But the near miss lingered, a reminder that their rebellion was a tightrope. The ban wasn't just about tobacco. It was about control, and the Nazis were masters at sniffing out dissent. Carl knew they couldn't stay hidden forever. The city was a pressure cooker, and every secret smoke pushed them closer to the edge. By the time they slipped out, the streets were empty, the moon a sliver behind clouds. Carl tucked his coat collar up, the faint smell of tobacco clinging to his fingers. Tomorrow, they'd be back. Same time, same place, same risk. The ban had meant to stamp out weakness, but it had sparked something else, a stubborn, smoldering refusal to kneel. For Carl and his crew, every cigarette was a battle won, even if the war felt endless. The secret smoking in the boiler room didn't stay secret for long. By the spring of 1942, whispers of defiance spread through Berlin's underbelly like smoke through a cracked window. Karl Weber and his crew hadn't planned to start a movement, but their nightly ritual behind the factory's rusted boiler had ignited something larger. Word passed from worker to worker, barmaid to baker, until hidden pockets of smokers dotted the city. Men who, like Karl, saw each illicit puff as a spit in the Reich's eye. The Nazi ban on male smoking, meant to forge disciplined warriors, was backfiring. It was turning ordinary men into rebels. Karl noticed the shift at the factory. Men he barely knew, gruff machinists, quiet janitors, started nodding at him in the halls, their eyes glinting with unspoken understanding. A welder named Klaus slipped him a matchbook one day, a tiny X scratched inside the cover. "Basement of the old brewery on Schillerstrasse," Klaus muttered. Midnight. Karl burned the matchbook after reading it, his pulse quickening. The rebellion was growing, and he was no longer just a man with a cigarette. He was part of something dangerous. The brewery meeting was a revelation. In a damp cellar reeking of stale beer, Karl found 24 men, their faces shadowed under flickering bulbs. Cigarettes glowed like fireflies, the air hazy with smoke. There was Fritz, his factory mate, but also strangers. A gaunt teacher, a burly dock worker, even a former policeman who'd been sacked for disloyalty. The group called themselves Defying, the Sparks. Their goal wasn't just to smoke. It was to erode the Nazis' grip, one small act at a time. Cigarettes were the start, but the teacher spoke of forged papers, the dock worker of sabotaged shipments. Karl felt a chill. This was no longer about a quick drag in the dark. The sparks operated like a web, each cell small and separate to avoid collapse if one was caught. Karl's role was simple: recruit trusted men from the factory and distribute tobacco, now flowing through a clandestine network. Women, exempt from the ban, were key. Greta, Karl's wife, joined reluctantly, hiding tobacco in bread loaves or under her coat during market runs. She hated the risk, but hated the Nazis more. "For our daughter," she'd say, her jaw tight. The network stretched beyond Berlin. Cigarettes came from smuggled crates in Hamburg, rolled by resistance groups in Munich. Each pack was a message. The Reich could be defied, but the Nazis weren't blind. SS raids grew fiercer. Checkpoints multiplied. Dogs, trained to sniff tobacco, prowled train stations. Karl's crew had close calls. Once, Hans nearly panicked when an officer lingered near the boiler room, only saved by Otto's quick lie about a leaking pipe. The Sparks brewery cellar was raided a month after Carl joined, but the group had already moved, tipped off by the ex-policeman's contacts. The cat-and-mouse game was exhausting, and fear gnawed at Carl. Every knock on his door could be the Gestapo. Yet the rebellion's momentum was unstoppable. By winter, the Sparks' acts grew bolder. They scrawled anti-Nazi slogans on walls, stuffed propaganda into cigarette packs for wider reach. Carl, once content with his basement smokes, now helped coordinate drops, tobacco and pamphlets hidden in crates of factory parts. The factory itself became a hub. Workers, emboldened by the Sparks, slacked on quotas, lost tools or miswired machinery, each sabotage a jab at the war machine. The Nazis sensed the unrest, but couldn't pinpoint its source. The ban, meant to unify, was fracturing loyalty. Carl's resolve hardened after a friend, a baker who'd joined the Sparks, vanished. The man's shop was boarded up, his family gone. Word was, he'd been caught with tobacco and a coded note. At the next Sparks meeting, Carl spoke up, his voice steady despite his shaking hands. "They want us scared. Let's make them scared." The group agreed to escalate, a public act to shake the city. They planned to flood Berlin's black market with tobacco, enough to overwhelm the SS's crackdowns. It was a gamble. Exposure could destroy them, but the Sparks were past caution. The plan worked, briefly. For a week, cigarettes flooded bars, markets, even SS barracks, smuggled by women and teens. Berliners smoked openly, a fleeting middle finger to the regime. Carl felt a surge of pride, but it was short-lived. The SS retaliated, arresting dozens, some Sparks, some innocents. Hans, the nervous apprentice, was caught in a raid. He didn't talk, but his arrest hit Carl hard. The boiler room felt empty without him. As 1943 loomed, the rebellion teetered. The Sparks had grown, but so had the risks. Carl, now a leader, wrestled with guilt. Had he pulled Hans into this? Would Greta and their daughter pay for his defiance? Yet he couldn't stop. The ban had sparked a fire, and the Sparks were its flame. Each cigarette lit was a vow. The Nazis wouldn't break them. Berlin's streets, cold and gray, hid 1,000 tiny rebellions, and Carl knew they'd keep fighting, smoke or no smoke, until the regime crumbled. The rebellion flickered on, but the cost was heavy. Carl and the Sparks never saw the Reich's fall. By 1944, arrests gutted their ranks. Carl vanished one night, betrayed by a neighbor's tip. Greta, left alone, hid their daughter and burned every trace of tobacco. The boiler room fell silent, its embers cold. Yet the Sparks' defiance wasn't forgotten. Their small acts, cigarettes, sabotage, whispers, fed the wider resistance, a slow burn that helped topple the Nazis. Berlin's smokers, once just men in shadows, became symbols of a city that refused to kneel. Their story, buried under war's rubble, lived in the stubborn spirit of those who lit up, knowing each puff could be their last.